The late afternoon light filtered through tall cedars, casting golden ribbons across the mossy floor. Elias had been out since dawn, patient, letting the rhythm of the woods settle around him. His breath came slow, his cheek pressed into damp earth, his finger hovering over the shutter. He had spent months trying to capture the elusive wolf that roamed the ridges just outside Ketteridge, a quiet mountain town tucked into northern British Columbia. This was his moment, or so he thought. What he didn't expect was the sudden weight pressing down on his back. At first, it felt like a branch, maybe some debris tumbling from the trees, but then it shifted, warm and deliberate, claws barely grazing the fabric of his jacket. Elias froze. Slowly, carefully, he tilted his head to the side. That's when he saw two rounded ears, dark eyes, wide and unblinking, and a wet nose glistening above a mouth that huffed small puffs of breath into the cool air. A bear cub. No bigger than a spaniel, but with the clumsy strength of something destined to grow enormous, had clambered right onto him and was staring at the camera lens as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. Elias almost laughed, but the sound stuck in his throat. His body screamed to stay still, but his heart thumped so loudly he was sure the cub could hear it. The little bear leaned forward, sniffed the strap of his camera, and without warning, flopped down on Elias's back like he had just found the coziest bed in the forest. The wolf Elias had been waiting for was long forgotten. He felt the cub's small weight shift, heavy paws pressing through the fabric of his vest. Then the cub yawned, a gaping pink mouth much too big for his little body, and settled in as if Elias were nothing more than a warm patch of moss. That was the beginning. Elias stayed there for several minutes, not daring to move, while the cub lounged across him. Finally, when his arms began to cramp, he carefully rolled to his side. Instead of fleeing, the cub blinked at him lazily, then clambered onto his chest. Elias found himself staring into the wild, curious face of a creature that should have been afraid of him. Instead, the bear cub raised one paw, pressed it clumsily against his chin, and huffed a tiny sound that was neither growl nor whimper. Elias laughed then, the sound bursting out of him, echoing through the trees. The cub didn't flinch. He just tilted his head, tongue poking out like a mischievous child caught mid-prank. Over the next hour, Elias abandoned the wolf entirely. He let the cub follow him as he moved through the undergrowth. Every time Elias crouched to adjust his camera, the cub nosed at his boots or batted at the dangling strap. Once, when Elias lay down again to frame a shot of a distant bird, the cub scrambled right onto his back and peered over his shoulder, as though critiquing the composition. Something was wrong, though. The cub was alone. No mother bear would leave her young wandering without supervision. Not for long. Elias knew enough from his years of wildlife work to recognize the thinness of the cub's ribs, the slight limp in one paw, the desperate curiosity in his eyes that spoke more of need than fearlessness. This wasn't a healthy cub living under his mother's care. This was an orphan. Elias felt the weight of that realization settle heavier than the cub on his back. He crouched low and spoke softly, his voice a gentle murmur. "Where's your mom, little one?" The cub blinked back at him, head tilting again, and then sneezed. That broke Elias's resolve. He couldn't just walk away. By the time he reached his truck parked near the trailhead, the cub was trailing him, stumbling a little, but determined. Elias tried once to step aside, to hide behind the trees, and let the cub wander back into the forest. But the cub stopped, sat in the middle of the path, and let out a soft, pitiful sound that cut straight through Elias. He sighed, scooped the small body into his arms, and felt the heavy paws clutch at his jacket, as if the cub had been waiting all along for someone to carry him. The first stop was the ranger station. His friend Rowan, a broad-shouldered ranger with the kind of beard that made him look carved from the mountains themselves, came out onto the porch when Elias pulled up. "What on earth, Elias? Tell me that's not a bear cub." Elias adjusted his grip on the bundle of fur. "It's a cub, and he was alone, limping. He kind of found me." Rowan rubbed a hand down his face, half laughing, half exasperated. "You're the only man I know who goes looking for wolves and comes back with a bear cub sitting in your lap." Together, they examined the little animal. Aside from the limp and some scrapes, the cub was alive, alert, and stubborn. The local vet, Dr. Henley, a retired wildlife specialist who volunteered for the park when unusual cases came through, was called in. He met them in his small clinic, squinted through thick glasses at the cub, and shook his head. Malnourished, yes, but he's a fighter. You're lucky you found him. Or rather, he chuckled. He found you. The cub was treated, bandaged, and fed. Elias stayed through it all, camera forgotten on the counter, watching the cub lap formula from a shallow bowl. When the meal was done, the cub waddled over to Elias's boots and collapsed against them, breathing deeply as though the decision had already been made. Elias knew then what Henley was about to say. He needs fostering, at least for now. The vet told him a sanctuary could take the cub later once he was stronger, but these first weeks, well, he had already chosen his person. So the cub went home with Elias. Life in the cabin changed overnight. Elias, who had spent years alone traveling for photographs and camping under stars, suddenly had a shadow. The cub followed him everywhere. If Elias lay flat on the floor to adjust camera equipment, the cub immediately climbed onto his back like the first day. If Elias tried to edit photos at his desk, the cub squeezed under the chair, batting at cables until Elias laughed and pulled him into his lap. At night, when the wind rattled the windows of his cabin, the cub would curl against Elias's side, paws twitching in dreams, tongue flopped out like he was making fun of himself. The cub's goofy personality became impossible to ignore. He had a habit of climbing into Elias's open camera bag and trying to curl around the lenses. More than once, Elias lifted the bag only to find it strangely heavy, unzip it, and be greeted by wide eyes staring out as if to say, "What? This is my den." He knocked over tripods, chased after reflections on the wall, and once managed to leap onto the kitchen counter, only to fall asleep inside a mixing bowl. Flour dusted across his fur. But he was also sensitive. On days when Elias came back from long treks, tired and frustrated, the cub seemed to sense it. He wouldn't pounce or play. Instead, he would crawl onto Elias's chest as he lay on the couch, press his small head under Elias's chin, and breathe steadily until Elias's shoulders relaxed. Weeks passed, and word spread around Ketteridge. Rowan came by often, shaking his head every time. "Still think you're a photographer, Elias? Looks more like you're raising a bear now." A delivery driver left packets of dried fruit at the mailbox for the little guy. Kids in town waved when Elias walked the cub on a harness. People stared, but when they saw how the cub nuzzled Elias's leg, the fear softened into wonder. The bond grew so strong that even when Elias tried leaving the door open, testing the cub's instinct to return to the wild, the little bear didn't wander far. He would pad to the porch, sniff the breeze, watch the tree line, and then trot back inside, tail wagging clumsily as if to say, "Not yet. Not without you." The most unforgettable moment came one chilly morning in autumn. Elias had been lying on his stomach in the meadow, camera trained on a distant herd of elk. The air was crisp, every breath a small cloud in front of his face, and frost clung to the grass, making it sparkle faintly in the weak sunlight. He had been out there for hours, waiting for the light to angle just right on the antlers of the dominant bull. His fingers were numb, his stomach pressed flat against the cold ground, but his patience was steady. That was the rhythm of his work. Quiet endurance, a stillness so complete that the animals might forget he existed. And then, just like that first day, he felt a sudden, unmistakable weight land squarely on his back. It was heavier now, more solid, the kind of thump that almost knocked the wind out of him. He froze, eyes closing in disbelief, but his lips broke into an instant smile. He didn't even need to look. He knew the cub had found him again. The bear had grown since their first encounter in spring. The image was absurd, imperfect, and yet perfect all at once. Elk in the distance, blurred by motion and shaky focus, but in the foreground, sharp and clear, one oversized paw pressing firmly against the barrel of his lens. That photo became his favorite. He printed it larger than life and taped it above his desk back home. Not because it won awards, it didn't. Not because magazines clamored to publish it, they didn't. It wasn't the kind of shot that earned professional recognition, but it was something infinitely better. It captured the truth. For Elias, the truth was simple and impossible to ignore. He had gone into the wild seeking animals to photograph, hoping to catch them unaware, to remain invisible in the background of their lives. But instead, an animal had found him, chosen him, claimed him in a way that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with trust. The cub had not asked for an invitation, had not cared about rules or boundaries. He simply decided again and again that Elias was safe, that Elias's back was the right place to be, and that the world looked better from that height. And in doing so, he changed everything. The cub was still wild, still mischievous, still unpredictable. He disappeared into the brush for days at a time, returning with twigs stuck in his fur or burrs tangled in his tail. He tested Elias's patience by sneaking up when silence mattered most, by chewing on straps and lens caps, by darting off just when Elias thought he had him figured out. But he was also something else, something Elias couldn't quite put into words. Proof. Proof that sometimes the best stories aren't the ones you plan. They aren't in the outlines drawn before a trip, or in the lists of animals you hope to capture on film. They aren't even in the rare, spectacular moments you wait for in silence, heart-pounding as the perfect subject steps into the frame. The best stories are the ones you don't chase at all. They're the ones that find you, tumble unexpectedly into your life, and refuse to leave. They're the ones that leap onto your back in the middle of the forest, paws pressing into your spine as if to anchor you in the moment. They're the ones that remind you, without words, to smile.